Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. In its last meeting ahead of the Union Budget 2018-19, the Goods and Services Tax Council met on Thursday to discuss a slew of changes in the GST law along with some tweaks in the tax rates. The Council was expected to decide on various key issues such as single form for tax filing and inclusion of petroleum and real estate under the GST net. Finance Minister Arun Jaitley recently told the Rajya Sabha that the centre was ready to include petroleum products under the new tax regime, but it would want a consensus with the state governments. While the state governments are yet to clear their stand on the issue, industry body ASSOCHAM said that the consensus on inclusion of petroleum would never emerge as the state and the centre were over-dependent on the sector for revenue collection. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will take a closer look at the decisions taken by the GST Council thus far. Joining me on the program today are Aman Agarwal, Director and Professor, Indian Institute of Finance; Ajay Shankar, former Secretary, Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, Government of India; Dr. Yashovardhan, Pathak, Additional Commissioner, GST; and Subhomoy, Bhattacharya, Consulting Editor of the Business Standard. And we are also joined by Saloni Roy, Senior Director at Deloitte. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Dr. Pathak, I'd like to begin with you, of course. What is the significance of the 25th GST Council meet that was held today?
Well, certainly, as the government has, the GST Council has been very open. They have been very responsive, and time and again, as we have seen, the rates have been revised, the rates have been reduced, and the rates have been rationalized time and again. Besides the rates, even things like the returns have been taken up, the composite schemes have been looked with an open mind, and every aspect of GST, whichever is which the trade and industry has brought to the knowledge of the council or brought to the in the council's ambit, has been taken care has been examined very scrupulously, and appropriate decisions has been taken by the council again and again. So what I'll say that it's a very responsive GST Council. It's a very responsive tax administration, and this is the concerns of the trade and industry has been taken care again and again.
Sure. Professor Agarwal, as far as the GST Council is concerned, everyone expected, the initial blips. Everyone expected there to be teething problems. Do you believe that those problems have now been addressed and we have a good tax regime in place at the moment?
Yes, there have been large number of issues in terms of implementation, how it's going to be perceived by the markets, by the people at large, and how would the industry respond to it, apart from the responses which the government has to give. To some extent, I think this GST Council meeting again and again is trying to resolve that issue. I think it will take at least another 6 months to 9 months before we could see more stability in terms of its implementation. And it will take another 4 to 5 years before it gets ingrained into the society as a normal tax, which most taxes have taken in place. However, there has been a very positive response, not only from the Indian industry, but even from the international markets. If you look at the FDIs, which have gone up to about $5 billion per month, as against 3 or 4 billion till about 2 or 3 years back, clearly shows the fact that there is a positive response, because a large number of international players were tied out and difficult to find how do they make their way through to so many indirect taxes. Still, there is this complexity wherein the people on ground, the industry, the small MSME segment, is unable to adapt to it because the chartered accountants who are required to do their job are also not themselves clear. Secondly, there are so many changes which are taking place with these GST councils that they are not able to adapt to changes. But I hope within the next 6 months to about 9 months, these things, these issues, these pinchy things will go off.
Sure.
You see, anything which is new introduced, you can never have a fixed time. It's like a baby being born to a mother. Is she ready at 8 months or 9 months or 10 months, or is she ready after 6 months? It's a difficult question to come out. Would the baby be able to survive itself comfortably or strongly, or would it go through a jaundice? Again is a big question. So these are some teething troubles which always happen, but fortunately the way taxes are being responded, the number of registration of taxes, the MSME segment, there is a mindset change, there is a need for changing, and I think that will bring in very positive impacts in a multiplying factor which the country will observe. And that's one of the factors why even the World Bank report which came out gave the fact that in 2018, January 2018 to December 2018, we are expected to grow at 7.3% and henceforth at 7%, which is one of the highest rates for their projection from almost all countries around the world in their table, which has clearly
Sure.
shown. So these are, I think, a positive sign, which I think the government is trying to even tell people and not to be misled. And I think people will in due course benefit, even the consumers, with the lower rates which they're going to give to their products because of the GST. If like petrol, if it is introduced, the highest net is say 28. As of now, different states are actually charging between 55% to about 70% is what the state tax is. So immediately you're going to see that shift. If not 28, if there is even a surcharge, you will still see a lower rate of petrol, which is a main important commodity, which actually seeds up all prices, whether it is services, manufacturing or food, everything goes up just because of it. So we are going to see those benefits in due course, and people have started realizing, in my opinion.
Mr. Shankar, can we see petroleum being brought under the ambit of the GST anytime soon, or do you believe that's a bigger problem which is going to take some more time, as the professor has just suggested 6 to 9 months?
I would argue, as I've argued earlier here, that the sooner it is brought under GST, the better it is for the economy. Now the question is
what are the issues that need to be thrashed out?
Now there is only one issue: willingness to forego revenue in the short run. Now this was an issue before every major taxation reform. We had very, very high rates of personal income tax, corporate tax rates. When they were brought down, there was great concern about loss of revenue. But over time, revenues went up and the GDP growth rates went up. Similarly, when import duties were reduced in trade liberalization, again there was great concern about loss of revenue. But revenues went up over time, the economy performed better. With the higher rate of taxation on energy, especially petroleum products, the states are the bigger losers, because if you look at the wealthy Indian, he travels to Singapore and Dubai rather than to Bhubaneswar or Kerala, because the airfares are very high and because petrol is taxed very high. So I think it's in the medium to long term interest of the states to accept a little loss of revenue in the short run and move to GST as soon as possible on petroleum products.
Sure. Talking about, the revenue as far as GST is concerned, Saloni Roy, we've seen a dip in GST revenue collection over the last 2 months. What can be attributed to that?
It's very difficult actually to pinpoint what are the specific reasons. There have been coverage about non-filing of returns. I'm not sure whether that's caused it. There's been this issue regarding credit, whether credit has led to a dip. It's very difficult to fathom as to what are the reasons. Maybe utilization of credit could have also led to a dip in the actual tax payments. Uncertainty of the tax law is also another aspect which is being given a reason for this. I hope we see increase in revenues, because that would give faith to all around that GST is a positive change. It is definitely positive, but when you see falling revenues, it does send a negative signal.
True, but the World Bank has given its thumbs up as far as some of these reforms are concerned. We'll have to wait and see how exactly everything pans out. 6 to 9 months is what the professor has said. I'm going to hold him to that. We'll see. We'll talk again in 6 to 9 months, Professor, and see where the GST is headed. Subhomoy Bhattacharya, let me bring you into the picture now. As far as the GST is concerned, one criticism is that over 50% of the GDP is left out of the ambit of the GST. Can we see power, real estate, liquor and some of these, these items being brought under the ambit of the GST anytime soon?
Yeah, these are valid questions, Frank. In fact, right from the time the GST was conceptualized, these were the topics which was always thought of as the difficult ones. If they were not resolved, would come down to be the pressure on GST, because the realization from other revenues, as far as the states are concerned, is never as robust as what comes from petroleum, as from alcohol, as from real estate. Real estate, they have done sufficiently fair, because a large part of real estate related transactions are now under GST. What is not there in GST is the secondary transaction. If I hold a flat and if I'm going to sell it out, that sort of a GST transaction doesn't come under GST. So real estate has been handled to some extent, which is why real estate is feeling the pressure of the transparency. Alcohol and petroleum is definitely there in the GST bill, and so as Mr. Ajay Shankar said, it's something that we definitely, the scope has been kept open. let's see how soon the state and the center accept it. Today's meeting, I understand they have rationalized the rates on around 49 items, of which I'm going by what one of the ministers coming out of the GST Council meet said, that about 29 items, the rates have been slashed to zero. We'll have to, of course, see which are the rates on which they've done it. I'm really concerned about those rates. I am concerned about two things which they should not do. One is that there's this input tax mechanism, and the other is the reverse charge mechanism. If these two are diluted, then the reason why GST has come in gets diluted to a very strong extent. Because these are the means through which one producer can data can be checked off against the other producer. If this mechanism, the government relaxes substantially, and these are up for debate today, then I would think we shall be taking a very retrograde step on GST. And frankly, my concern would be if I don't hear that sort of a thing hasn't happened. Because if that happens, then turning it back, because this is an election year, so I don't see any chance during this year that those things would be turned back. And next year, after the election, we are taking out a lot of time to bring GST back on it. Because without these, GST is just another excise and indirect tax system without the advantage which it promises.
Sure.
So that is what I'd like to see, that there has been no dilution of those two provisions.
Sure. Dr. Pathak, there's this perception that the GST process or, the filing process is quite cumbersome, and people, look at it with, don't look at it very positively as far as the filing process is concerned. Do you believe that it needs to be simplified? Are we going to see a simpler GST going forward?
Well, the GST Council has been in time and again in the meetings, whenever the GST Council met, they have simplified the process. In the initial, for the composite scheme people, they had to file 3 returns every month. Later on, it was simplified to just 1 return quarterly. So these issues are taken care of. These issues are being addressed by the Council in its own wisdom, and I believe even further, if the Council feels that these issues needs to be addressed in the interest of the trade and industry, and of course at the same time in the interest of the revenue, I think they will take appropriate decisions. And as I said earlier, they have been very responsive. Every issue is being examined. And now, even with the trade, these concerns regarding filing of returns are not very cumbersome and not as difficult as it has been made out to be earlier, because now even all the GSTN is functioning properly, and the smaller assessees, their issues have been addressed to a large extent. So as regards the bigger assessees, as regards the ones which have turnover more than 1.5 crores, the GST Council would take appropriate decision as and when they feel it needs to be addressed.
Professor?
Yes, I think this is a good step, which is being initiated from the last meeting going on. And we will see more of these cuts, not only cuts, but we will also see in due course, maybe another 6 months time, we'll see these 4 slabs will be reduced to 3, and then let's see if they can reduce further. That's an objective. Please understand that when we are foregoing certain tax system, we have a revenue generation from that. So the government keeps that in mind, that we have X amount of revenue coming in. We need to keep that revenue so that we can have budgeted expenditure take place. So they had to keep that high, keeping that in mind. But when the revenue starts coming in, when things start falling in place and they see they have more revenue, they have no reason. It's not a question of collecting more and more tax. They would certainly like to ease things up. And I think this is a process, it's a trial and error process which has to be adopted by any government to see how can they ease up things. We are going to see more easing on agriculture based products. There's a lot of complication which some of these councils are facing. And it is more because of the fact that the chartered accountants, which actually do the job for large or small firms, whether it's a small firm or even a restaurant, a chartered accountant comes and plays the role. GST is like a horror movie for the chartered accountant, because it is like relearning the whole tax system altogether, telling him to go to this class 1 when he started his practice from the beginning. So who are new chartered accountants, it's easy for them. For the rest of them, it's very difficult. So that's why we are still not seeing it getting that smooth implementation, because the chartered accountants themselves are not ready and not able to embrace the kind of changes which have taken place, and how do they go and adapt it and then intimate to their own consumers who are supposed to tell it in terms of product creation. And this is something which is going to ease out. I think the GST Council will have to lay down certain structure in terms of educating the chartered accountants, even through the ICAI, lay down some certain foundations so that they could be courses which could elucidate them, help them get it into. Not only simplifying a form, but actually, unless you know, I have 10 different kind of products. Like someone was telling a beautiful story about mithai making. You add kaju to it, it's in a different tax rate. You add something more to it, it's in a different tax rate. Now that makes it very complicated for a mithai wala who is not even a graduate many a times, and he has to now implement that and get it up. Now this is where, and as a result, not to make losses, he puts the all stuff into the higher bracket, and then he will see if there is some kind of a thing happens. Like recently there has been a profiteering penalty which has been put on a large company. We will see that happen more often, but it is not a question of penalizing, it is a question of educating people and then putting it on.
We've seen that happen with the restaurants as well. We know where the GST has been brought down to 5%.
Yes.
What the restaurants have done is they've just increased the prices of their products, and the prices remain the same. So it doesn't matter that the taxes have come down.
Because they have not been intimated by their chartered accountant as to how should they go about pricing the products. Even today, large amount of products in big malls, big marketplaces are not GST compliant, because they just made it includes GST. They are not sure as to what is the GST to be applied. So they say whenever it is to be applied, we will pay it from our pocket or we will charge it from the consumer, but let us make it as GST so that we comply with the norms. So they are not actually reflecting and that's why we are not seeing the prices fall down. Some companies, and especially international companies which are producing on this ground, they have done it because they have to be legally compliant, because they can have long repercussions effect in their presence in India. So they have done it so far.
Let's now listen to what the Finance Minister has to say, as far as the 25th GST Council meet is concerned.
जो रिटर्न फाइलिंग प्रोसेस है उसका सरलीकरण किया जाए, सिंप्लीफिकेशन ऑफ द रिटर्न फाइलिंग प्रोसेस। काउंसिल ने एक मिनिस्टेरियल ग्रुप भी बनाया हुआ था श्री सुशील मोदी की अध्यक्षता में, और एक आईटी कमेटी भी थी श्री अजय भूषण पांडे चेयरमैन जीएसटीएन की अध्यक्षता में, और इसके अलावा श्री नंदन निलिकनी भी दोनों ग्रुप्स के साथ इन्फोसिस की तरफ से जो सर्विस प्रोवाइडर हैं जीएसटीएन के, क्लोजली इंटरैक्ट कर रहे थे। तो तीनों ने, श्री सुशील मोदी ने अपनी डिस्कशंस जो हुई उसके बेसिस पे अपना प्रेजेंटेशन दिया। श्री पांडे और जीएसटीएन की तरफ से श्री प्रकाश कुमार ने दो ऑल्टरनेटिव प्रपोजल्स थे जो समझाए, और उन दोनों को इंटीग्रेट करके श्री नंदन निलिकनी ने एक डिटेल प्रेजेंटेशन काउंसिल को दिया कि उसमें से जो बेस्ट पॉसिबल ऑप्शन है काउंसिल उसमें से ले। इन प्रपोजल्स के पीछे जो प्रोसेस था, जिस दिशा के अंदर पूरा डिस्कशन गया कि 3B का जो रिटर्न है उसकी फाइलिंग फिलहाल चलती रहे, और जितने भी सेलर्स हैं या सप्लायर्स हैं वो अपने इनवॉइसेस लोड कर दें और उन इनवॉइसेस पे के माध्यम से किस किस को सप्लाईज किए हैं ये डिटेल्स दे दें। और स्वाभाविक है कि बायर और सप्लायर दोनों के बीच में जो 3B की रिटर्न फाइल करेंगे वो सप्लाईज अपने आप रिफ्लेक्ट होंगी, और अगर उसमें कोई फर्क नजर आता है तो एट अ लेटर स्टेज दे कैन बी आस्क्ड टू एक्सप्लेन, और ये एक डेटरेंट होगा फर्स्ट इंस्टेंस में कि भाई आपकी 3B की जो रिटर्न है वो उस इनवॉइस के साथ मैच करती है कि नहीं, और अंत में इसको इस दिशा में ले जाएं कि केवल सप्लाई इनवॉइस लोड हो जाए और उसी के बेसिस पे टैक्स डिपॉजिट्स हो जाएं, और उस सप्लाई इनवॉइस की लोडिंग पे ये तय हो जाए कि दोनों पार्टीज ने जो क्रेडिट्स क्लेम किए हैं वो उचित है कि नहीं, क्योंकि ये 3 अलग अलग प्रेजेंटेशंस थे और उसमें से ये डिस्कशन की दिशा बनी। तो अगर एक वाक्य में कहूं तो इट फाइनली वाज कल्मिनेटिंग इन अ डायरेक्शन दैट इनिशियली देयर विल बी अ 3B return and there would be a supplier's invoice which could be adequate. So this would be a very simple process. काउंसिल फेल्ट कि इसके ऊपर जो मिनिस्टर्स ग्रुप है वो और हमारी आईटी कमेटी और नंदन नीलेकनी एक बार डिस्कस कर लें और इसको फॉर्मलाइज कर लें, और कुछ दिनों के बाद इसको हम राइटिंग में मिनिस्टर्स को सर्कुलेट कर देंगे काउंसिल में, एंड वील
The Finance Minister there addressing a press conference after the 25th GST Council meet that was held through the course of the day today. Subhomoy Bhattacharya, the Finance Minister, stressing on the fact that the filing process has been simplified, and that's the key takeaway from the 3 minutes that we heard what the Finance Minister had to say.
Yeah, you know what, I like initially we were talking a lot about the simplification of systems, but let me make it very clear. Not all the accusations about simplification is about simplification. It's also about the fact that many trades do not keep records. And let's put too soft a word on it. It is a problem there in India. Now, what the Finance Minister is saying makes me confident that possibly there's not going to be dilution of the reverse charge mechanism or of the input tax credit mechanism. And I think that's very important. Because essentially, without that order matching, which I talked about earlier, if it doesn't hold, then GST doesn't hold. What he's essentially saying, to put it very simply, is that as of now, traders will be allowed to file the 3B return on the basis of whatever the supplies and whatever their transactions are, without any questions asked. And gradually, there's a move that will going to happen where even this return will not be there. Whenever they put a supply, and obviously there'll have to be some record of whatever they are supplying, whatever supply they are receiving. That the moment they put it up on their on the GST platform, the tax data will be sort of calculated from that itself.
Sure.
Which seems a very it's a good idea. Obviously, there will be people who will have issues with even that, because essentially, if it's a question of whether to file records or not to file records, then that is an issue which is a different thing altogether. But
all right,
as of now, but I didn't hear him saying anything about whether in the interregnum, whether they are planning to sort of keep this thing in suspended animation.
Sure.
I hope not.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program, putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.